Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of City Lights Live. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis. We are delighted to be hosting the symposium titled Poetry in the Age of Machine Intelligence. It is co-sponsored by Black Ocean Press. We will be exploring the questions surrounding the human role and how art is made as AI grows in utility and cultural presence. We'll be exploring such questions as, what does the rise of artificial intelligence mean for creative industries? We are bringing together a panel of AI developers, poets, artists, researchers, and curators to interpret the current moment and to ask some relevant questions which may be useful to us as we plunge headlong into a radically changing world. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ohlone people, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. Numerous dialects of their language have been spoken along this peninsula. We'd like to take this moment to offer our respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. To claim that there is a tremendous amount of hype surrounding the topic of AI in the media is, of course, a bit of an understatement these days. This season alone, there are dozens of new books on the subject, and yet the tropes surrounding AI continue to abound. What we hope to accomplish today is to generate a discussion outside of the buzz of the cliches that explores our relationship to AI in our creative interactions with it. Hopefully, in the process, we can dispel some of the doomsday scenarios and aim towards developing an intelligent discussion about the role these emerging tools play in art and culture. We are interested in the exchange between human and machine and how it is woven together in this moment, in the moment that original art and poetry is generated. We would like to emphasize and more fully explore the relationship between prompt and craft. We find ourselves at an emerging trailhead of poetics that asks us to face the role machine intelligence plays within our own very ancient, very human traditions. That is to say, the role of the poet and sublime expression. The inspiration for today's event was the publication of the book title, I Create Like the Word, Poetry in the Age of Machine Intelligence. It's curated by Damiani with promptcraft by Alexander Reben and published by Black Ocean Books. This is a new title from Black Ocean's Undercurrent series. I do have to note at the outset that regretfully there has been a delay in printing and the book has been postponed. We won't have it in time for this event, but we felt it important to proceed with our sessions due to the importance of the subject and its timeliness. Today's proceedings will be arranged into 3 sessions. Our opening session is titled Material Histories, the long view on language models, intelligence, and poetry. It will be moderated by Sasha Stiles with participation by Stephen Marche and Keith Holyoak. Hopefully, Dennis Yi Tenen will be with us. He is not here just yet, but we'll see if he shows up. We will take a 15-minute break at the end of it, then resume with the second session, which will be comprised of poetry readings and commentary on the first session. Joining us will be Kay Alado McDowell, Mark America, Mashinka Ferunce Hakopian, David Jave Johnston, Sasha Stiles, and Lillian Yvonne Bertram. We'll then have another short 15-minute break, followed by our final session titled, Is AI the End of Poetry? It will be moderated by Danny Snelson. Actually, Danny is not going to be able to be with us today, so it's going to be a conversation between John Cayley and Madison. Actually, it's Madison MacArthur that is not with us today. It's actually Danny Snelson and John Cayley. They were going to be in conversation. They'll each give a presentation and then be in conversation with us. We are asking that everyone exit the room at the end of each session and use the provided link to re-enter the room. To make an opening statement, I would like to welcome now Jesse Damiani. Jesse is a writer, curator, and advisor in new media and art and emerging technologies. He is senior curator and director of simulation literacies at Next Museum, arts and culture advisor for Protocol Labs, and the host of Adobe's Taking Shape, a hub for 3D art and design. an affiliate of the Meta Lab at Harvard and Institute for Future. His essays have appeared in Architectural Design, Big Think, Flash Art, Forbes, The Verge, and Wired, amongst other outlets. He was founder and served for many years as series editor of Best American Experimental Writing from Wesleyan University Press, and his poetry appears in numerous publications. Joining him will also be Alexander Reben. He is an artist, researcher, and roboticist. He is best known for his artworks created in collaboration with artificial intelligence and his research in robotics. Mr. Reben's work has been exhibited widely in the United States and Western Europe, including the Museum of Applied Arts, Vienna, and the Charlie James Gallery. His work is included in the permanent collection of the MIT Museum, and he currently serves as Director of Technology and Research at Stochastic Labs in Berkeley, California. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. There is much to talk about and so little time to really talk about it. I would like us to begin with your journey towards realizing the book, but also the subject in general as well. If you would chart out for us where we're going today with this amazing group of poets, scholars, and theoreticians.
Amazing, Peter. Thank you so much for that high energy introduction. For those of us for whom it's morning, afternoon, or evening, it's always good to be met with such enthusiasm. First, obviously, have to thank you and the iconic City Lights. Also have to thank Black Ocean for bringing this together. And yeah, so I'll start with a framing of the origin of the book, which begins with actually my career, the hat that I wear as a curator of new media art. And in working with those various new practices, machine learning became part of what I was seeing among the artists who I was working with. And at that time, I started to get it in my head to pursue a line of what Holly Herndon calls spawning. And so thinking about what does it mean to have a machine intelligence or a machine creativity that can produce work in your likeness, plausibly in your likeness. Now, this was 2018, so there were very few references of this, at least in the sort of then current iteration of AI. So, I was referring to work like Holly Herndon's or Taryn Southern's. I myself am not a coder, so I went looking for folks who might be able to artistically and technically help me realize that vision, and had been prior introduced to Alexander Reben's work, particularly through his TED Talk, which I really encourage everyone to go watch it. It's a TED Talk that's been composed using, I believe, a Markov chain. Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but using an early language model to produce a TED Talk that, of course, comes out with this kind of uncanny gibberish, but I'll let Alex say more about that. So we started kind of working through what that book might look like. And one of the main driving pieces there was thinking about using art as a means of translating this technology, which we viewed not just as a technology that was kind of over on the fringes, but one that would have incredible import for society at large. We stayed in those dialogues, and life happened, and a pandemic happened. And then, of course, in 2022, ChatGPT happened. And so then in conversation with Danielle Lisi, we started to reimagine the book as not something that really looks at one poet's, the ability of machine intelligence to produce poetry in the likeness of a single poet, but rather to produce a curated anthology that maps a larger sort of thought and creative space, and really think or really sort of dive into these questions through the form of roundtable interview conversations, through essays, and through an ekphrastic creative exercise. So all of that's underway. I won't get too much into the sort of the big view stuff now, just because I really want this event today to be an introduction from many of the contributors to the book, but also people who have really invested years of their careers at this, at this vanguard. But I just want to sort of encapsulate it and say that poetry is and always has been inextricably mediated by technology, whether that was oral poetry or stone tablets or word processors or paper. We've always been, poetry has always been in an inextricable dialogue with technology. And so I see this conversation, or I see this event today as a forum to get into the full range of that promise and peril, and to take a really rigorous, critical view, as well as openings into the aesthetic possibilities. And so I wanted to use that moment to actually hand over now to Alex to talk about his experience working across a wide different array of projects and initiatives, not just at the intersection of languages and technology, but also his approach to machine learning technologies, because he has a wonderful and important history in this field.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, I feel like we've been talking about this book so long that we've gone from super early technology, and it's always been a moving target of like where to plug ourselves in for it. Yeah, when you mentioned the TED Talk, so that was with that recurrent neural net, actually, out of all the technology. And that actually required me to scrape the transcripts of all the TED Talks and make my own model at the time, which was quite fun. And that actually sprung from an experiment with fortune cookies. So I went online and I assembled what I think was the largest database at the time of fortune cookie fortunes, and also fed them through a neural net. And I would get a lot of gibberish out from that, but every so often there was some phrase that seemed to evoke a feeling. So for example, I'd get outputs like I'm a bad situation, or your pain is the essence of everything and the value of nothing. And again, the input to the system was positive fortune cookie fortunes. So even in these really rudimentary early neural nets, there was something interesting happening. Obviously, in that case, I would have to go through hundreds of outputs to find one or two nuggets in there. And that's where the human feedback and curation loop is very, very important. But now, obviously, with things like GPT-4, if you ask it for a fortune or output, you're much more likely to get an output that makes sense. So yeah, I think this book probably also represents a bit of a timeline of the evolution of language technology in AI, which is important as well as having those perspectives. I feel like at least for me, the chain ultimately ended by being OpenAI's first artist in residence, where I got to take a little bit of what we were building for the book and translate it into some of the tools I had made over there. There's a link in the chat, I think, of a mode of the conceptual camera where you can take a picture of something and you get poetry coming out of it. And I've actually seen a few other places where that's being turned into a commercial product, which is interesting. So we're seeing it move from the absurdist art world now to the VC funded design world. So you might see that sort of thing being put out by a company on Kickstarter at some point, which to me is quite cool. But I think, taking a step back and asking, what do we want from technology? What do we want from these tools? How do we want to use them to enhance creativity? I think are very important questions. And certainly everyone has a different viewpoint on that. Right now, I feel like we're in the, if we used photography as an analogy, I feel like we're in the wet plate photography stage of AI. It's still a little clunky, still needs some, chemicals and special things to do. But eventually, we all have cameras in our pockets. And I think also like photography at first, it was seen as both positives and negatives, right? There's a lot of fear around it, a lot of ideas that, was it really art and expression, or wasn't it? Was this going to replace, portrait painting and landscape painting? It also did things tangential to it. I think it pushed painters to really look at start like abstract expressionism and would push other art forms out there. So yeah, I think we're at the point where we're going to see how AI, in a sense, might be similar to that throughout history. And I think we're at a really critical point in history where we need to ask these questions and really ask what we want back from these systems.
Hear, hear. Yeah, so that sort of leads us into thinking about what the point of today is. And Peter really captured it well out of the gate, so I won't add too much, but simply to say that I wanted there to be a space where we could have real conversations about some of the possible semantic confusion around things like artificial and intelligence, looking at both the hype and doom on that binary and the ways that that's causing us not to maybe necessarily have the best approaches to these technologies in the production of poetry. And so we have the material histories panel, which kind of gives us that longer view from four luminaries, interdisciplinary thinkers who can really take us there. We then have this series of readings where we're going to hear from people who have worked with machine learning technologies in their writing practices, and also people who have used machine learning technologies as something to jump off from, to comment on, to build their own art from, the body of ideas that machine learning technologies represent. And then we'll close with a panel that I think becomes the kind of extreme position reductionist take that you hear a lot, the kind of fatalistic take of does AI mean the end of X? And in this case, we're looking at that through the lens of poetry, and we'll hear from folks who have worked very critically with these tools and thinking through these tools. So truly, it's just an introduction. Each one of these people, we could hear a whole day's worth of content from them, and that wouldn't even be enough. So hopefully this is an introduction to, think more critically about the subject. And to that end, I wanted to, Peter, open back up to you to hear a little bit about your and City Lights' perspective on these technologies and how you're thinking about them.
Yeah, back in the 90s, City Lights published a book titled Resisting the Virtual Life, The Culture of Politics of Information. And it was edited by James Brooke and Ian Bull, and essentially got us branded as Luddites. But the book was intended to be more of a radical critique of the way in which technology was being used, not so much that technology in and of itself was bad. And that was indeed what Luddites, I think, were also critical of, in the manner in which, technology is used. City Lights, Ferlinghetti were never anti-technology, and City Lights, being the United States' very first all-paperback bookstore, has in reality embraced the technologies of its day from its get-go. We're simply inquisitive. We're interested in engaging in relevant discussions, and really, what are the right questions to ask is the thing that we're really concerned about. And we encourage participation, not spectatorship, and citizenry, and not consumerism. Besides Resisting the Virtual Life, City Lights also published another book shortly after that titled Close to the Machine, Technophilia and Its Discontents, and that was by Ellen Ullman, who's one of the first women to work in computer programming. And the book recounted Ellen's growing dissatisfaction with life in the tech industry, and it interwove and kind of juxtaposed between the attractions of programming against the more unsavory realities of actual life in Silicon Valley. So the book was intended to unsettle the myths and stories the mainstream media and the power brokers of Silicon Valley were circulating about the rise of the networked world. So we're always kind of asking the question, I mean, who is technology being created for? Who is it truly serving? What are its consequences? And what should we be thinking about? What do we want, technology to do for us? So we find ourselves again at a crossroad. And if we can encourage a more nuanced and challenging discussion, that's what it's all about here. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, with that, I guess I just say let's get off to the races.
Yeah, let's dive into it. Session 1 is titled Material Histories, the Long View on Language Models, Intelligence, and Poetry. As I said, Sasha Stiles will be moderating. Sasha is an award-winning academic American poet, artist, AI researcher, widely recognized as a pioneer of generative literature and language art. She is the author of Technology and the co-founder of experimental literary gallery, The Verse, and has served as a poetry mentor to the humanoid android BINA 48 since 2018. She's going to be joined today by Dennis. We were waiting for Dennis Tenen. Hopefully he'll be here. Stephen Marche and Keith Holyoak. Stephen Marche is a Canadian novelist, essayist, cultural commentator, and educator. He is contributing editor at Esquire. for which he writes a monthly column titled 1,000 Words About Our Culture. He's the author of 3 novels and a short story collection, as well as 4 nonfiction works. His most recent book is titled On Writing and Failure. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, amongst other outlets. Keith Holyoak is a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California, Los Angeles, and a leading researcher in the field of human thinking, as well as a poet. He is the author and co-author or co-editor of several books, including The Spider's Thread, Metaphor in Mind, Brain, and Poetry. He has also published translations of classic Chinese poetry, as well as 4 volumes of his own work. So we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase books by today's participants. We also encourage everyone to post comments. And if you can switch to speaker view, which can be done in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, it actually gives you a clean view of whoever is speaking versus that Hollywood Squares effect. So please join us now in giving our panelists a warm welcome. I will turn over things to Sasha.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This is so exciting. I've really been looking forward to this symposium for a long time now, and I'm so eager to read this book when it does eventually make its way into the world. So really, really wonderful. I am a really big fan of Jesse and his thinking about AI poetics. We've been having conversations in this area for quite some time now. So this is really a fun development. And as luck would have it, Alex and I actually spent some time together in New York just a few days ago, where we were generating AI-powered poetry using his systems, taking photographs of objects and generating ekphrastic verse, which was really great. So really honored to be here with both of them. I also just wanted to add quickly that, last year I had the pleasure of working with the Allen Ginsberg estate and with Peter Hale on a project all around AI poetry, kind of integrating generative tools into the estate's archives of Ginsberg's work. So it's really, I think, especially meaningful, adds another layer for me to be here with City Lights. And so thank you so much to City Lights and to Peter for creating this forum. Like all of you, I was really looking forward to hearing Nora moderate this panel, but I'm selfishly very thrilled to have been asked to step in, and I'm really excited to be here with Keith and with Stephen, both of whom I admire greatly. My fingers are crossed that Dennis also joins, but if he doesn't, he is here in absentia, because I've got my copy of his book Plain Text here with me. It's been sitting next to my computer for many years now, Plain Text, The Poetics of Computation. So really, really a great group here. Okay, so I wanna just maybe give a little bit of a quick kind of intro, and then really yield the floor to Stephen and Keith for the majority of this conversation. A lot of the discourse around AI that we're hearing today stems from the arrival of things like ChatGPT, which Jesse mentioned earlier. So that was back in November 2022. And of course, a lot has changed since then. I think for those of us who've been collaborating with machinic systems for longer than that, though, we're operating from an understanding and an appreciation of deeper histories and deeper contexts of computational poetics, and actually of language as a technology that has continued to evolve over time and continues to evolve us as well. And for example, my own practice as a poet of generativity is really embedded in ancient and classical literature, equally as it is embedded in the future of language. And I think that that's something that, probably all of us here, Keith and Stephen, and certainly Dennis, we all have that in common. So I was actually going to start with a question for Dennis, which I now sort of want to open up as more of a, a broader question for both of you, but really to sort of kick us off by thinking about AI's deep history, not the future of AI, but thinking a little bit about the history and the trajectory that's brought us to this moment. And in this, I was really thinking about some conversations I've heard, Dennis speak about the roots of AI and the thousands of years of linguistic innovation, and really how it is, in many ways, the, I guess, culmination to this point of a deep human impulse to share information, to pool wisdom, and to think and to write together. And I wondered, maybe Keith, we could start with you and then move to Stephen, but I wonder if you could give us your perspective on AI and its historical roots, as well as, you know, its status now as this totem of the future.
If I can jump in, I guess, not really of ancient history, but coming at here as a perspective of a cognitive psychologist, cognitive scientist, we probably would start on the order of 1950 with Alan Turing. He himself, who of course was the founder of modern computer science, was very explicit that he thought that in the end, there's nothing humans can do that a computer can't do as well. So the very basic idea was that certainly all of thinking is some kind of information processing, and that can be redone instead of in a biological system such as ourselves. It can be in a physical silicon-based system. And of course, at that point, you know, he was way far over his skis. Like that was the very dawn of everything. I think what has happened in the last few years is obviously sort of closer to making that a reality. Also, I mean, coming from the point of view of psychology, that around from that time, there was kind of a division of sorts within the field between those who fundamentally are interested in humans, what is human intelligence, what is human creativity, versus the machine version. And to some extent, these things go together, because to the extent that humans are, you know, for example, apparently the best at writing poetry of all the known organisms there are, then maybe the machine would imitate whatever humans processing is. But there's always been the alternative possibility that human intelligence turns out to be just one way of doing apparently complex sorts of thinking, and there could be qualitatively different ways. And right now there's big debates that are essentially trying to understand, like, what is our current situation, because on the one hand, the GPT family and everything that's getting so much attention has obviously made great leaps forward, but there's a dearth of information about how they're doing it. Like literally, if you get into the machine, what is in there? Is it got something like a human mind reborn from a different source, or is it completely different? And then I guess I would just finally say, again, from the psychology point of view, maybe the three big concepts at play here are intelligence, which we think we have to some degree, and that artificial intelligence obviously is directly aiming to have. There's creativity. And although those two are linked, they're not identical. You can do intelligent things that don't seem very creative and so forth. And the third one is consciousness. This notion that we, and very likely lots of other biological organisms, have some inner experience that it's like something to be yourself right now. So in evaluating like what's going on in the machine mind, sort of each of these raise questions, sort of, first of all, intelligence, but then can it be creative, which of course gets at our direct theme today. And is there anything like consciousness going on, or potentially could go on? Is a sentient computer on the horizon, or is it something that's literally impossible? Anyhow, that's enough to my view of history over the last 80-ish years.
No, that's fascinating, and I think we'll pick up on that last point in just a moment. But I want to kick it over to Stephen quickly to sort of pose the same, I guess, rather large question. But just, you know, Stephen, is AI brand new, or does it have precedence?
It's interesting. I have an essay coming out in the New Yorker next month, where I interviewed everyone who was involved in the original Transformer paper, right? So that's the paper called "Attention is All You Need," which is the beginning of linguistic artificial intelligence. And the thing that I found fascinating talking about them is that when they wrote that paper, they were considered real I mean, real outliers. Like they were a very tiny group of people because the thing they shared in common is that they believed that a general intelligence or the purest route to abstraction was language.
Mhm.
And that was at the time was considered quite crazy, right? It was like the artificial intelligence that had come out in 2015 and in 2013 were largely visual, right? And their supposition was that language was the best method of abstraction. And I mean, I think we haven't really processed this as a culture, but like the fact that the largest intelligence that we have that's computational is linguistically based, that all the other forms of intelligence ultimately derive from that is really, really super weird, right? The fact that it's not mathematical, that it does not come from replicable and reversible functions, that it actually comes from human language, that's the best way to process intelligence, that's the best way to generate it, is actually something that I mean, when I was talking to Noam Shazir about this, who is he was integral to the development of the transformer, but he's also an inventor of things like Google AdSense, a very inventive human being. And I asked him, like, how much of artificial intelligence do we understand now? Like, where are we at? He said, we're roughly where we were with chemistry in the 12th century. We're in alchemy. We're in a state of alchemy. We don't actually know what the hell is going on, right? And so I would just say that that one thing that I don't think people have processed is that language, literally poesis, has been given it is literally effectively been proven that it is the best model. It is actually the best model for understanding the world, which is, absolutely no one would have guessed except these guys.
Gosh, it's so fascinating. And I often do sort of think about this long trajectory of linguistic innovation from orality to literacy to now generativity, and all that meant for the development and the shaping of human consciousness and of the way we perceive the world and how we experience, ourselves. And language is so much bigger and broader and deeper and more profound, I think, than so many of us sometimes think, which is why I'm so happy that poets and philosophers and creative writers are beginning to become so involved in this area and to use tools like natural language processing, because I think we bring these points of view to it that are really important and that don't always get picked up by some of the tech folks. Well, okay, so I think there's a couple different places to go from here. I wanted to actually, come back to Keith and, this idea of human intelligence versus machine intelligence. And I think that kind of gets at what Jesse was suggesting earlier, that we really sort of tease out some of the deeper implications of some of the jargon that we hear around this field, around things like even the word AI and what that means, or the phrase AI. And Keith, I was thinking in particular of the wonderful essay that you wrote called "Can AI Write Authentic Poetry?" And I was thinking about this word authentic and, authentic versus artificial. And I was thinking of it specifically because as I've been, writing over the past 6 or 7 years with AI and bringing my poetry, my generative poetry into classes, one of the most frequent criticisms I've heard is that this poetry is not authentic, that it's inauthentic, that it's not real poetry. And I wanted to maybe lean into this for a moment. And I want to ask you, and then again, kick it over to Stephen for his thoughts on this as well. But, if you could maybe muse a little bit on this idea of what is authentic poetry, what is authentic intelligence, just so we have a baseline of comparison.
Yeah, great question. Of course, defining authentic is a very, very tricky matter. But let me just say a little bit of how creativity has been viewed particularly by the psychologists who have studied what goes on in creativity. And it always starts with two general criteria. There's a product which is novel in some sense and which is useful in some very broad sense. So where the usefulness might be practical or commercial, but it could be simply aesthetic or whatever. Very, very broadly, there's a definition that the product must be novel and useful. But on top of that, lots of people within the psychology, and I think here it echoes with a lot of artistic people also say, there's something about the process by which the product comes about, which seems important or possibly even essential to kind of the definition of creativity. Actually, I have a quote from Leo Tolstoy, which is, "Art is the activity by which a person, having experienced an emotion, intentionally transmits it to others." I mean, so this sense that the creation comes about because of some inner experience that the creator has, which includes often, particularly in poetry, some emotional content. That is the point of what makes the product creative. Like in extreme cases, I actually just yesterday, one of my colleagues, Paul Abramson, has written a little piece on the poetry of Paul Celan as an example of art emerging from trauma. In his case, it was because of the impact of the Holocaust on his entire family and the rest of his own life, that his poetry reflects the emotional intensity that led into it. So I think to the extent, well, let me add one more thing about this sense of authenticity. One component sometimes is talked about is kind of creative autonomy. There's a sense that the creator sets their own problem. They decided what they're going to do, and they select what information might be relevant somehow. And then at the other end of it, they to some extent are their own self-critic. They can decide, is this what I was seeking? Is this a valuable product that I have now produced? And I think it's still true as we survey all the fantastic things of current AI. It's lacking in this sense of autonomy. ChatGPT just sits there till somebody puts a prompt in and says, okay, I would like something along these lines.
Right.
And furthermore, usually there's a human being who's acting as a curator, who might be, selecting the good pieces that come back, might be massaging it in some way. The computer systems themselves are quite limited, either in initiating some new line of work or in evaluating whether in fact they've now got a particularly creative product. So, I mean, a lot of what's being done, of course, I think you could certainly call AI assisted creativity, and there's all kinds of interesting ways in which that is being done and probably could still be done. Not only, of course, in poetry, but in art and so on. I think to the extent some of us have doubts about AI creativity, it's really the sense of fully autonomous AI activity. This kind of speaks to the last topic in the afternoon, where it would, the answer would be no, that poetry is not going to die. AI-assisted poetry will be added into the mix, but it's not going to eliminate the human element altogether.
Yes, I think that's really fascinating. You've actually, I think, teed up perfectly a question that I did want to pass along for Stephen, actually, exactly on this idea. I think that, there is this perception when we talk about generative AI that things are being created in that sense. They are autonomously being, born into the world. And that's something that I, as a writer who works very, collaboratively, very intensively, very intimately with AI, I always like to kind of lean into that a bit and tease out some of the nuances of what it actually means to collaborate with AI. I think there is this very important and tangible difference between generative AI as an autonomous author, AI acting as kind of an ars autopoetica, versus generative AI as, more of a co-author or an amanuensis, or like an interactive encyclopedia or a muse or an editor. And so Stephen, as someone who has, spent a lot of time experimenting with and writing with different generative AI tools, I'm curious about your views, both as an observer and as an active participant in this. Just your ideas of AI as an author in its own right versus AI as a co-author.
Well, I think the point you brought up earlier about how you and I have been doing this for like a million years, and it kind of gives you a different perspective when you've been working with AI from 2017 on. Like the first story I used generation for was 2017, pre-transformer. So that's like prehistorical here. And when you go through the list of it, it's, you understand that these are tools, right? And the tools get a lot better. But the question the question of authorship and generation, that's the line that this is going to ride on, right? That's the exact question, not necessarily of to me, not necessarily a question of these grand philosophical questions about creativity, but like that's what it can do as a tool that nothing else can do. And we are so early in this creative practice that we're not using it right, for sure, right? Like we're like the early days of the photograph, or the early days of film. Like we haven't figured out yet how to use this. But one thing I think that is really worth thinking about as we try to make this into something, a true creative practice, is like is the resistance to it that people feel. Right. And I think that's because, like, for example, I wrote a story once where I worked with a machine learning engineer at Cohere, where we created a series of prompts and then trained the prompts. And it was an infinite story. Right. It was an infinitely generated short story. Right. No one would buy it. There's absolutely no one who is interested in using that kind of work in the literary world. I think in the high art world, and perhaps in the experimental poetry world, there is a lot more attention to this, and there's a lot more acceptance of this as an experimental practice. But I thought I had something pretty damn special, an infinite story. Could not sell it anywhere. And I'd been publishing this stuff in lots of places for 5 years. I had a similar experience where I was working with a machine learning engineer working on filling in the blanks, the lacunae in Gilgamesh, right? Which it can actually do to a remarkable extent, and is a pretty powerful scholarly idea. No one is interested, right? And I think there is a kind of like deep repulsion in people for this, because it is exactly this kind of category violation of authenticity and creativity. And it, like, my new metaphor that I'm using, don't steal this because I'm going to write it in the next week or so, is that this is the microwave of language, right? Like that's ultimately what we're getting at. Like we're not getting super intelligence. Like the ChatGPT intelligence is like a well-informed person of moderate intelligence, who knows a lot of stuff, but then is occasionally wrong, right? Like it's not actually some god. It's actually just like your basic human being, right? And just as the microwave went through these phases where it was like, this is going to solve everything. Oh no, I literally can't eat anything microwaved. Like In-N-Out Burger can't move west because it won't microwave its food, right? Like it needs fresh food. Like that's its promise to its customers. Similarly, I think AI is going to be used in all these ways, but it's going to have to be hidden. It's going to have to actually be contained in some way where people don't actually know that it's there. Similar, like if you prepare someone, like just their avant-garde chefs who use microwave, Nouvelle Cuisine, if you read those original cookbooks, which I strongly advise you not to do, since they make terrible dishes when you're trying them at home, but they use the microwave a lot. Right, like they used it a lot as a way of preparing things before searing and stuff like that. I think AI will similarly be used by a few, radicals like you and me, Sasha. But then in general discourse, it'll actually be like, if you went over to somebody's house and they made you microwave food, you'd be like, what the I mean, I'm leaving, you know, and I think so. How we overcome that, I think, is actually the question of this practice. Like how we overcome that resistance from that authenticity thing. You know, the woman who won the prize in Japan, whose book was 5% AI generated. I mean, that's a very good sign that these are the prejudices here are cultural. Like there's just not the same attachment to these concepts in Japan as there are in Western Europe and North America. And you can see that already in how AI is used in literary terms.
Yeah, and you can see it too in terms of how a country like Japan is approaching issues of IP and copyright and the legalities around that as well.
Yeah,
which I think is a really material point of this as well. Wow. Okay, so this is giving me a lot to think about. I've been trying to scribble notes as well as you've both been speaking. I think microwave is very interesting. I sometimes think about it as, you know, almost the difference between taking a walk in a garden versus getting on a plane and getting to travel to another country or something like that. I think it certainly is giving you a different way, a different experience. And it is my hope, you know, that all these things can sort of coexist, that, you know, microwave can be used to some extent in fine cuisine.
Everyone has one.
But hopefully we don't rely on it.
Yeah.
I guess there's two things that come up that I want to get into. And one is just to sort of continue this thread. And then I want to actually get into, just if we have time, get into a little bit more of the cognitive science area and probe Keith's expertise there. But quickly, something that you just touched on is this idea of using AI to do things like fill in the lacunae in existing texts. And the project that I mentioned earlier with Ginsberg, you know, also uses AI not to generate new text necessarily, but to engage with existing materials more deeply and to kind of foster a new kind of intertextuality and foster new kinds of scholarship and readership. And I wonder if you might be able to sort of comment briefly on that, like these other uses of AI that have to do with using language, that involve large language models, but that are not purely about generating text that doesn't exist. The other sort of meaningful use cases for these kinds of technologies.
Well, that's a really interesting idea. So, in fact, in some of our own work evaluating AI models, besides sort of IQ style tests, and our group is recently, our group being Dusan Stamenkovic, who's over in Sweden, and Nick Ishian, who's in UPenn. We asked GPT-4 to interpret novel metaphors, first of all, because there's a big general issue, of course, in evaluating new AI. They've seen most of the internet. How do you know that you're giving them something new as opposed to just an opportunity to regurgitate what they were actually trained on, which is rather opaque? So in this case, we went to the trouble of having Dusan extract metaphors from Serbian poetry, translating the English, checking that whether we could find them or not in the internet. The essence of is the ChatGPT-4 proved to be very good, and it wrote interpretations at least as good as UCLA undergraduate. So not like great literary criticism, but you know, quite acceptable. We also tried it on some short poems, which we acquired from various poets that had not been published and were not on the internet, and therefore couldn't have been in the training data. And then we had a literary critic evaluate those. And roughly speaking, he gave ChatGPT-4 an A grade on its literary interpretations across the board. And actually, I was discussing this with a ninth grader in the Bay Area, Sierra Elman, just by email, and she's been doing some interesting little studies of her own. And one thing she pointed out is, well, actually, this potentially becomes a way to use AI to assist your own writing. So if you give your own writing in some draft form, you can get feedback on what it thinks of it, and identify what, any, poetic techniques you may have almost or actually unconsciously started to use, but bring them to your attention, and maybe you can kind of work and extend that. So in a sense, it's kind of a cheap and easy substitute, or at least augmentation, to having like a workshop group or something to share your drafts with. Maybe you're just too shy to show your early drafts to other humans, so show them to the AI, and maybe that will in fact help you improve it. And that's, a potential advantage that's quite independent of whether or not the AI can actually generate decent poetry, which all by itself, which is a whole different thing.
Right. Right. I don't know, Stephen, if you have anything you want to add, otherwise I can.
Well, I mean, the problem with having an AI literary critic is I can't throw a glass of wine in their face, right? I can't tell them, what I know way better than you about everything. So like, that's just not going to be that useful to me.
Just pull the plug.
Yeah, exactly. What do you know? You're just all human intelligence.
Yeah. By the way, I meant to throw in, because there's actually been some very recent research that speaks to Stephen's earlier point about how there's just flat out bias against AI. A nice study it's actually done with artwork, where the group had AI generated artworks, and then it asked people how good they were. And for half of the artworks, they said they were generated by humans. And for the other half, they said they were generated by AI. In reality, they're all generated by AI. But people, you have higher ratings of aesthetic value, etc., to the artwork that you label as human generated than.
Right.
So Stephen's quite right that there's sort of that you're fighting against if you're trying to make an AI important. And I guess, since I'm partly at least sort of the spokesperson for the doubters about this, I feel like, part of it is there's a sense that if you hear it's the flip side of why most people are very interested in biographies of the creators, like what was their life like, what was they reacting to. Basically, they're trying to understand, like, where did this work of art come from? And even if it's the artwork is like a poem in a bottle where there's no known author, you speculate, like what could have caused someone to produce this work. You tell somebody, well, this was actually generated by AI, and the mystery's all gone. Like there was no process of somebody turning their sorrow into art, because there was no sorrow in the first place. And it's kind of deflationary. And I think that's kind of what impacts the perceived aesthetic value once something is labeled AI.
Yeah. Although, of course, people said that about photography, right? That like it was just, you just clicked a button, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you go back to the early, imagine explaining to someone in the early history of photography, like not only will there be really good photographers, but there will be people who are really good at being photographed, and they'll be paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to be photographed. Like they would just simply, you don't know what the effects of these things are when they get really advanced. And I mean, when you say there's no sorrow there, like I actually think just like in some photographs you can feel pain. The thing is, we're not using this art form properly. We haven't actually figured out what it's supposed to do. Much like with the camera, it took so long to figure out what it's supposed to do, right? And when we figure it out, it will have to register human pain, right? Like we'll have to feel the pain through it, right? Because something that doesn't register human pain is worthless. Right, and so that's the question: how do you use this tool to get to that? But it's but I don't know. That's not really the question that's being asked. I mean, I find it's extraordinary how hard it is to me. Sasha, you're so much more successful at this stuff. You actually can figure out how to get people to pay you money for this stuff. But like for me to want to. Yeah, sometimes. But like for me I feel like the projects that I have are the most in AI are the most exciting projects that I work on, but finding homes for them, I mean, I give up sometimes, right? Like you have to, because there's like not just a no market, there's like an anti-market, right? They like literally
Yes.
they like literally, we don't want you to do this. Like which is a sort of different creative reality from anything I've faced before.
Yeah, well, the photography is a very interesting analogy here, right? Because in fact, notice what you're pointing out is that people came to appreciate the skill of the photographer and indeed of the subject. It was a human element, basically, that
Yes.
the initial reaction was, well, this is just some mechanical registration of reality. Well, it turns out, no, it can be much more than that. Because in fact, again, you can have the human who chooses exactly what to photograph and how to present it, and then and so forth. So I think one way to put kind of, I think what we're struggling with here is that a lot of what needs to happen is to explore more broadly the interface between AI and the human artist as part of it.
Just
I
as a
think
side note,
what people react against, I think, is sort of jumping to the idea that, well, the human's gone. This is just going to replace it, and that's probably not what we as artists want. And
Right.
Where I am in Ontario,
Mhm.
if you file a legal document now, it has to be sealed that it was not AI generated, right? Like it's literally like if you file a legal brief, it cannot have been you cannot have used artificial intelligence to generate it, or you have to acknowledge that you did. And one person who was caught doing that they got all the costs of the other side paid for. Like there is stiff resistance that I think as experimental writers, I think we're used to feeling resistance to difficult work. I mean, it's inherently part of being an avant-garde working in the avant-garde. But in this case, it's not just like the normal resistance to avant-garde work. It is like literally this fills people with a certain kind of loathing that they don't even really process. It actually is there's a kind of revulsion. I wonder if that could actually be used artistically in some interesting way, but
probably.
I think we're starting to run out of time, and this conversation could go on and on and on, and I'm glad the symposium will continue. I think just a couple maybe thoughts just to kind of sum it up, and then kick it back over to Peter and Jesse and Alex. I think it's really, I think, an important thing that we're having this conversation in the context of poetry, and especially in the context of bookstores and libraries and places that are these repositories of shared knowledge. I think there's something really profound about the acknowledgement that all the writing that we do as human beings without AI is a conversation, is in dialogue with many other voices, involves building on existing systems, right? We're all using conventions and systems of grammar and syntax. We're using rules and methods and approaches that have been sort of given to us, have been built and engineered by others and kind of passed along to us. I think there's actually quite a lot of affinities, as you both have teased out, in lots of ways between poetry and technology in this way. And I think it's one of the reasons why this is such a fascinating convergence. So thank you so much for all of your time and your amazing insights. I think I'll hand it back over. And you left me with lots to think about, so much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Yeah.
Thanks for the three of you for this fabulous discussion. And Sasha Stiles, thank you for doing the honors at such short notice. You're really a stellar moderator. Very grateful to you for this. We're going to take a break, about 10 minutes, and then we're going to jump into the next session.